Summer, 1944. Normandy, France. A German Panzer commander watched through his periscope as American Sherman tanks rolled across the hedgerow country. He smiled. The Sherman was a joke. Thin armor, underpowered gun. His Tiger could destroy 3 Shermans before they got close enough to scratch his paint. The Americans called it the Ronson. Lights up every time, like the cigarette lighter. The Germans had another name for it. Tommy Cooker. A steel coffin on tracks. But then something strange started happening. The Shermans weren't fighting like individuals. They moved in perfect coordination. 3 tanks would bait his Tiger into the open, while 2 more flanked from the sides. When he tried to reposition, they anticipated every move. When he radioed for support, the response was slow, confused, delayed. The German commander was fighting 5 coordinated tanks while commanding 5 isolated ones. By the time he realized what was happening, it was too late. A Sherman round punched through his thinner side armor. His crew bailed out as the tank caught fire. As he sat in a prisoner of war camp weeks later, he learned the truth. Every single American tank had a radio. His Panzer division? 1 radio for every 5 tanks. The Germans had the better tanks, the Americans had the better tank system. And in war, the system always wins. This is the story of the radio that won World War II. Let's be honest, the Sherman tank was not the best tank of World War II, not even close. Its 75mm gun couldn't penetrate the front armor of a German Tiger or Panther at combat ranges. Its armor, at best 2 inches thick, was butter to German 88mm guns. It was tall, making it an easy target. It ran on gasoline, which meant it burned when hit, and it caught fire a lot. American tank crews knew this. They called their Shermans death traps. Survival rates for Sherman crews in Europe were brutal. If your tank was hit, you had seconds to bail out before the ammunition cooked off and the whole thing turned into an inferno. The Germans knew this too. They mocked the Sherman. Panzer crews joked about the American tin cans. One captured German tanker, when asked about the Sherman, laughed and said, "We called them gifts. Every time we destroyed one, it felt like unwrapping a present." So why did the Allies win the tank war? How did tens of thousands of inferior Shermans defeat the technologically superior German Panzers? The answer wasn't in the armor. It wasn't in the gun. It was in a piece of equipment most people never think about when they picture tank warfare. It was the radio. In 1944, German tank design was the most advanced in the world. The Panther tank had sloped armor that could deflect almost any Allied shell. The Tiger had an 88mm gun that could destroy a Sherman from over a mile away, far beyond the Sherman's effective range. German engineering was legendary. Their tanks were mechanical marvels, precisely machined, heavily armored, devastatingly armed. In a one-on-one duel, a Sherman didn't stand a chance. American tank doctrine even acknowledged this. The informal rule was, it took 5 Shermans to destroy 1 Tiger. 4 would die. The 5th might get a flank shot. But here's what the Germans didn't understand. Tank warfare wasn't about individual duels. It was about coordinated maneuver, information, communication, speed of decision-making. And in that arena, the Americans had an advantage the Germans didn't even know existed. Every Sherman tank that rolled off an American assembly line came equipped with 2 radios as standard equipment. 2. The SCR-528, a frequency-modulated radio for communication within the tank platoon. Crystal clear, interference-resistant, with a range of 10 to 15 miles. And the SCR-508 for communication between platoons and higher command. Every tank, every single one, from the company commander down to the newest recruit driver. The Germans? In 1944, only 1 in 5 Panzer tanks had a radio, and those radios were often temperamental, short-range, amplitude-modulated sets that crackled with static and interference. Most German tank platoons relied on hand signals, flag semaphores, and shouted commands. At first glance, this seems like a minor detail. A radio? That's not a weapon. It doesn't shoot. It doesn't protect. But in the chaos of mechanized warfare, information is everything, and the Americans were about to prove it. Why did every Sherman have a radio when German tanks didn't? It wasn't that the Germans didn't understand the value of communication. They did. German tank doctrine emphasized coordination. Their early blitzkrieg successes depended on fast, coordinated armor movements. The problem was production. German tanks were handcrafted. Each one took weeks to build. Radios were expensive, complex, and in short supply. Germany was also fighting on multiple fronts, desperately short of resources. Copper for radio components was needed for ammunition. Skilled technicians were needed for aircraft production. So German commanders made a choice. Equip command tanks with radios. Use motorcycle couriers and signals for the rest. America had no such limitations. American industry in 1944 was the most powerful economic force in human history. Factories that made radios for civilian cars simply retooled for military contracts. The same assembly lines that produced commercial electronics churned out 20,000 tank radios a month. By mid-1944, the United States was producing more Sherman tanks in a week than Germany produced Panzers in a month. And every single one came standard with equipment German tankers considered a luxury. The Germans were still fighting World War II with World War I communication methods. The Americans had entered the modern age. Having radios wasn't enough. American tank crews trained extensively on radio discipline and tactical communication. Platoon leaders coordinated movements in real time. If one tank spotted an enemy, every tank in the platoon knew within seconds. Targeting information was shared instantly. Tiger at 2 o'clock, 800 yards, hull down behind the tree line. Compare that to German platoons, where only the commander's tank had a radio. When a German tanker spotted a threat, he had to use hand signals or flags, if the other tanks were even looking his way. In the chaos of combat, with engines roaring and explosions everywhere, this system broke down constantly. American tank platoons fought as wolves. German platoons fought as lone predators who happened to be near each other. The Germans had superior tanks. The Americans had superior teamwork. And in mechanized warfare, teamwork turned out to matter more. Let's look at how this played out in actual combat. Normandy, July 1944, Operation Cobra. American forces were breaking out of the Bocage hedgerow country. German Panzer divisions were tasked with stopping them. A typical engagement. 5 Shermans encounter 3 Panthers in an open field. On paper, the Panthers should win. Better armor, better guns, better positioning. Here's what actually happened. The lead Sherman spotted the Panthers immediately. The platoon leader radioed, "Contact! 3 Panthers, 1 o'clock, 1,200 yards." Within seconds, all 5 Shermans knew the exact location, range, and disposition of the enemy. The platoon leader gave orders. 2 and 3, flank left through that tree line. 4 and 5, suppress with smoke. I'll bait them forward. This entire exchange took 15 seconds. The lead Sherman fired, deliberately missing but forcing the Panthers to react. The German commander, without a radio, had to physically expose himself from the turret to signal his platoons. Hand signals, arm movements. In the time it took him to communicate, enemy tanks spread out. The American flanking maneuver was already in motion. 2 Shermans emerged from the tree line, hitting the Panthers from the side where their armour was weakest. One Panther brewed up immediately. A second, trying to turn to face the new threat, exposed its flank to the lead Sherman. Another kill. The third Panther retreated, but without radio communication, the rest of its platoon, scattered across the battlefield, never knew why. 5 Shermans, 0 losses. 3 Panthers, 2 destroyed, 1 retreating. This wasn't an exception. This was the pattern. December 1944. The Ardennes Forest. Germany's last major offensive on the Western Front. German tank units, including elite SS Panzer divisions, smashed through American lines in a desperate attempt to reach Antwerp and split the Allied armies. The Germans had the element of surprise. They had fuel captured from American depots. They had the best tanks they'd fielded in months. This should have been their moment. Instead, it turned into a catastrophe. And radio communication was a key reason why. American tank units, even when surrounded and cut off, maintained radio contact with higher command and each other. Commanders knew in real time where German breakthroughs were happening. Reserves were rushed to plug gaps within hours, not days. German units, despite initial success, quickly became disorganized. Panzer columns advanced too far, lost contact with infantry support, and found themselves isolated. Without effective radio communication, German commanders couldn't coordinate the kind of rapid, flexible response needed to exploit their breakthroughs. One captured German officer later wrote in his interrogation report, "We could never understand how the Americans repositioned so quickly. We would break through a line, advance 5 kilometers, and find American tanks already waiting for us. It was like they could read our minds." They couldn't read minds. They just had radios. German tankers started noticing patterns. American tanks always seemed to know where they were. They coordinated unnaturally well. They repositioned faster than should be possible. Some German commanders began to suspect the Americans had superhuman intelligence networks, that spies were everywhere, that every French civilian was reporting German positions. The truth was simpler. Every American tank was a mobile information node. When one Sherman spotted a German position, 15 others knew about it within 30 seconds. This created a psychological advantage. German tankers, already outnumbered, felt like they were fighting an enemy that could see everything, coordinate perfectly, and respond instantly. Which, effectively, they were. By late 1944, German intelligence had figured out the American radio advantage. Captured Shermans were examined. Reports from frontline commanders emphasized the need for better communication equipment. Germany tried to respond. Plans were drawn up to equip all new Panzers with radios. Production was supposed to ramp up. It never happened. Germany's industrial base was collapsing under Allied bombing. Resources that might have gone to radios went to fuel, ammunition, and spare parts, all of which were in desperately short supply. Even if they'd wanted to equip every tank with radios, they simply didn't have the production capacity. The irony: Germany had invented many of the radio technologies the Allies were using. German scientists were pioneers in radio communication. But German industry, strained to the breaking point, couldn't mass-produce what German engineers had invented. Meanwhile, American factories kept churning out Shermans. Every single one with 2 radios, standard equipment. Military analysts after the war studied the Sherman versus Panzer matchups extensively. They wanted to understand how a technically inferior tank had dominated a superior one. The numbers told the story. In one-on-one engagements, the Panther or Tiger won about 70% of the time. The Sherman's weaknesses were real. The 5 Shermans to kill 1 Tiger rule wasn't far off. But tank battles aren't one-on-one duels. They're fluid, chaotic, multi-vehicle engagements where information, positioning, and timing matter as much as firepower. In multi-tank engagements, where American forces had radio coordination, Sherman platoons had a 75% victory rate. Communication turned a 3-to-1 disadvantage into a 3-to-1 advantage. The radio acted as a force multiplier. It made 5 Shermans fight like 15. It turned individual tanks into a cohesive, intelligent system. The Sherman tank story is a perfect example of a fundamental military principle. The whole system matters more than individual components. The Germans optimized for individual tank superiority. They built the best tanks in the world. Mechanically, they were masterpieces. The Americans optimized for system superiority. They built a good enough tank, mass-produced it, and gave every crew the tools to coordinate effectively. The Sherman wasn't the best tank, but the American tank system, Shermans plus radios plus trained crews plus logistical support plus industrial capacity, was the best tank system. And systems win wars, not individual pieces of equipment. This philosophy extended beyond tanks. American military doctrine in World War II consistently chose mass production of good equipment over limited production of excellent equipment. Why build 10 perfect tanks that take a month each when you can build 100 good tanks in the same time? Why equip some tanks with radios when you can equip all tanks with radios? The Sherman embodied this philosophy. It was easy to produce, easy to maintain, easy to repair, easy to ship overseas, and every single one came with communication equipment that made it exponentially more effective in combat. German Panzers were technically superior, but when one broke down, and they broke down a lot because precision engineering is fragile, it might sit disabled for weeks, waiting for spare parts. When a Sherman broke down, crews often had it running again within hours. If it was too damaged, another Sherman was already on a ship from Detroit. By 1945, surviving German tank commanders understood what had happened. Interrogation reports from captured officers reveal a recurring theme: shock at American coordination. One Panzer colonel wrote, "We were fighting blind while the enemy could see. We were shouting to each other while they spoke clearly across kilometers. We had the better weapons, but they had the better system." Another report stated, "The Americans did not win because their tanks were superior. They won because their tanks worked together in ways we could not match." Every American tank was a piece of a larger machine. Our tanks were just tanks. The Germans had focused on building the perfect tank. The Americans had focused on building the perfect tank army. Guess which approach won? The lesson of the Sherman's radio wasn't lost on military planners. After World War II, every army in the world adopted the American model. Equip every combat vehicle with communication equipment as standard. Modern tanks, armoured personnel carriers, even individual soldiers carry radios. The idea of sending troops into combat without instant communication is unthinkable now. But in 1944, it was revolutionary. The Sherman's radio turned tank warfare from a series of individual duels into coordinated, intelligent manoeuvre. It proved that information and communication were as important as armour and firepower. Maybe more important. The Sherman tank wasn't the best tank of World War II. It wasn't the most heavily armoured. It wasn't the most powerfully armed. German and Soviet tanks were superior in almost every measurable way. But the Sherman had something more important than individual superiority. It was part of a system that worked. Radios, training, logistics, mass production, doctrinal flexibility. The Americans didn't try to build a super tank. They built a tank system that could overwhelm any opponent through coordination, information, and sheer numbers. The Germans laughed at the Sherman, called it a death trap, mocked its thin armour and weak gun. Then they fought against Sherman platoons that moved like a single organism, anticipated their every move, and coordinated attacks they couldn't counter. By the time they realised the Americans had built something fundamentally different, a networked, coordinated fighting force rather than a collection of individual tanks, it was too late. The war was already lost. Today, every military on Earth understands the lesson of the Sherman's radio. Communication is foundational. Coordination is everything. The best weapon in the world is useless if it can't work effectively with other weapons. The Sherman tank won World War II not despite being inferior, but because the Americans understood something the Germans didn't. In war, the system always beats the individual. And the best system is one where every piece can talk to every other piece. The Germans had the better tanks. The Americans had the better army. And that made all the difference.